Welcome to What's the Point? A weekly discussion of truth, realities, challenges, theological and philosophical views, national policies, and international concerns. Welcome to What's the Point? Today we're going to talk about a topic called Why Does a Compassionate God Allow Sufferings? So, for our first question, it would be, is it necessary for us to suffer to some extent? That if you want to start with that.
Well, God does not really want us to suffer if it is not for a purpose. God is not a God who is a sadistic God that he wants his people to suffer. No, he does not want. He wants his people to be happy. He wants his people to be prosperous. He wants his people to be successful. Under ideal circumstances, God wants his people to be experiencing all the good gifts in life. So suffering is more like a consequence of people's sinfulness and problems. So it's really more a problem with people than a problem with God. If you're really talking about something.
Okay. What do you think about that, Josh?
So I think, similar to Dad, where it's like, God's God that, blesses, and God's God that, is faithful in nature, and, is giving, and, wants people to live this righteous life, but also this blessed life. But it's the aspect of, since we live in a sinful world and sinful nature, and, it's because of our disobedience to God that, this kind of happens. And I'm just trying to think about, like, in what ways maybe God can be seen, but like in reality, God is so he's so good. But the aspect of it is that he just doesn't want anything to compete with your love for him. And so that's maybe part of the reason why as well that all this stuff happened as far as like sin and stuff, because at the end of the day, like, he just wants glory, and he wants you to just give him thanks, and like simply just allow him to be the God of your life and be number one above all else. So
Okay. So you mentioned that it's because probably of consequences of people's actions or disobedience. So why does God allow sufferings like calamities and death of innocent people? I understand if he was trying to punish a certain person or something that has been sinful or disobedient, but all of us are sinful. But why would he allow for calamities to happen that would wipe out innocent people, or quote unquote innocent, since all of us are really sinful, so there's really not one person that has not sinned? But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Okay, Kerry, I think we have to begin by understanding that when God created Adam and Eve, they were created perfect and they were sinless at the start. So long as they were sinless, there were no problems. There was no sickness, there was no death, and there were no calamities. It was after Adam and Eve sinned that sickness began, death began, calamities began. So originally, all these negative things is not God's problem. It's a consequence of man's sinfulness. And then generation after generation, people even very strange, because no one teaches a person to sin. A child is born very innocent, but as the child grows, the child will learn how to lie on his or her own, and so it very strange that people become naturally sinful. And so I would believe that, first of all, we must understand that sin, the sufferings generally is a consequence of sin as a general principle.
Okay.
When God wiped out the world through a flood in Noah's days,
Yeah.
God has to do that because the world was so wicked, and he has to wipe them out and just live a a family of righteous and obedient people, so he can start again. Because God is always a God of second chances. So you see,
Okay.
the flood, you blame God for the flood in Noah's day. It was God's way of wiping the people out because they were just so wicked. And when we complain about God allowing it, we must understand it was God who created us.
Wow.
And so it's
Okay.
the right to abolish us. Whatever he wants to do, that is his right. And so we cannot complain. He created us.
Wow.
He
Yeah.
gave us gave us the air to breathe. Uh, so if well, we should be thankful we reached this age. In other words, God has every right, whether you will live 1 day, 2 days, 1 month, 82 years, 92 years. So it it's a matter of perspective. Where are you looking? Where are you looking at? Well, you're complaining. I mean, good for you. At least you live that long. What if God will just cut you short at age 20?
Mm.
So it's a matter of when you will recognize God as the creator, then he has every right to his created being.
Wow. That's good. Yeah. What do you think about that, Josh?
Uh, well, in general, just like the idea of um, the this aspect of why this calamity happened to people, this and that, like that was saying, goes back to um, the idea that God created us, and it's not our own bodies, our own temples, but it's literally the Lord's. And so, just about thankfulness. But the reality is like um, we would have more leeway to bargain with God, like if we were completely faithful with Him. But I think everybody knows in their heart that one way or another somebody's you've sinned before. And so even one because God's so holy and righteous, like you're at His mercy, like because we've lived this sinful life. And so He has all the right to take us. And as a matter of fact, like in reality, like because God is so holy, and that we forget that, like sometimes, like when we sin, He has all the right to take it away, like take our lives away. Like that's how holy He is. But He
Mm.
gives us chance after chance, just to live this amazing life. And so that's the idea, and that's what I grab onto, is like I deserve more punishment that I actually get. So whatever it is, like even if to the point of death, like that's something that I deserve in the first place. And so whatever life that He gives me now, like I'll be happy with, because that's a lot better than the outcome that I had because of my sin. And so
Right. Yeah. I think
Yeah,
what, yeah.
yeah. If I may add as well, example, um, in particularly in the Philippines, we have floods happening, flash floods happening. You know what is the cause of that? People's greed. When they logged the forests, illegal logging, cut the forest, and then sold all the logs, did not reforest. That's really man's greed,
Oh,
and greed is sinfulness. And as a result of that, you have denuded forest that now cannot control the flow of rain, hence the floods. Now you blame God for the flood.
right.
Why
But
would you
you,
not blame the people's greed, the
right.
people who cut the forest? You see, so even now, global warming. Now you complain about some really strange weather conditions, but look at the gas emissions. I mean, the harmful emissions we're throwing up the air from our industries. Again, a result of the greed of humanity. Then we
Right.
blame it on God.
But it's
You
the
see?
greed of humanity in general. There's not one
Yeah,
person, one company, um,
correct.
that you can blame. Like for example, obviously climate change is an issue, but in Texas, when we had our big storm here,
Mm.
um, the biggest problem was that our gas or our electric grid basically was not winterized. We were not prepared for something this cold. I mean, they thought they were, but they didn't realize that everything was going to freeze. Now, because Texas is mostly electric, like we do not have gas, well, we don't have much gas stoves and gas things like that. We everything was shut off, including the stove, the fireplace, and so it couldn't even be used for heat. So there's certain things like, we still need gas, but I know a lot of the people say, oh, we need to have electric everything because that's more better for the environment. But then it kind of is like outweighs it. I think it's balanced. Like it's supposed to be a certain way that's balanced.
But I didn't quite get it, Carol, although it's not really our topic. The one that happened in Texas, if it's electric, so what's the problem with the pipes when electric? Because you had brownouts.
Summer we use a lot more electricity than we do in the winter because it's so hot here and everybody has AC. So for
Yeah.
all summer we can run our ACs and not fry the grid. However, in the winter we could not run all the heater because Texas was not prepared for that amount of demand of power. So some of the power plants actually close in the winter, and because they don't need that much power. And then they also did not winterize. So in other states like that snow all the time, like Colorado or the East Coast, the oil that they use is what they call heating oil. So it's hot when it goes to the pipe. In Texas, I believe it's not like that. The oil is not hot because we never had the need to use hot oil. So we did not invest in that technology because this kind of weather only happens like once in 100 years. So that is how they were that's how they were saying that unfortunately for Texas, or in general, we still need gas, I guess is what they were saying. I know it's a little off topic, but I was kind of just thinking like certain things that we do or calamities that happen, I'm sure comes about with certain things like we didn't prepare for it and things like that. Basically, so we've discussed like why God is why sufferings need to happen, or why they normally happen. But we also mentioned that it's usually because of man's disobedience and man's sin. So if God is omnipotent, why can't he just stop all evil so that this can be avoided?
Well, if God does that, then we will become all robots.
That's true.
Uh, because then there is no choice anymore. We're talking about people blaming, atheists blaming God for, say, crimes. Why is there so much crime? Why, in society, why is there so much oppression? But I said, look, example in a country, people allowed endemic sin like corruption to happen. Like almost every government employee is corrupt. So because of corruption, people are impoverished. There is poverty because of corruption. And because there is poverty, the crime happened. Drug addiction happened. So the crime and drug addiction, you blame it on God, you don't blame it on the corrupt people. What's the cost of that? So you see, that is what I was talking about. We're quick to blame God for it, but in fact, it's really a consequence of sin. So we were saying about why did God allow it? Because God cannot make us robots. So
Right.
we made a choice. We made a choice, and our choice was a bad choice. And our choice, collectively, or as a nation, as a community, is to be blamed. Our choices are to be blamed. Why? We have the consequences.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess an additional follow-up question to that is what is the relevance of free will and suffering? Because it sounds like God can't take evil away, because then we would become robots and then we don't have a choice. So it sounds like it's kind of correlated, is it?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question because, well, God does not want us to be robots, and therefore, because of our choices, often we suffer. But God is a God of grace, that those people that believe in Him, the people of faith, the people who believe in God, God has a way of turning those sufferings for the benefit of the sufferer.
Mm.
So even if that suffering is really caused by somebody else or society or someone else, like an innocent man killed by a drug addict, because the drug addict was a consequence of societal sinfulness. But the innocent man was an innocent man. But then it creates a big problem for the community, for the family who was left behind, a wife and kids who are suffering now because the innocent father was killed.
Right.
People say, what kind of God is that, who allowed a wife and 5 children now to be hungry because the father was killed, the innocent father was killed by a drug addict?
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, but again, God has a way of preserving the wife, probably giving the wife a good job, giving a break for the children. God will still take care of the consequence of that. Meaning, when God has to allow it because it's a product of our will, His grace will still be there to help the suffering people. That's the reason why God is close to the people who are suffering.
Another
God heals the sick.
Right.
Yeah.
another example is like this idea, like thinking about Paul and like reading about Paul, recently for school. Like, so Paul was in prison, like many times, and
Mhm.
and the idea is like people are like, because then the context of that was people are getting kind of pissed because Paul's supposed to be their leader, but he keeps getting into prison. So they're like, dude, we don't have a leader. But like, the idea that he was trying to mention is that like, God is sovereign, but also at the same time, like him being in prison was actually a great thing because like because he was in prison, not only did it help, people will get saved there, but he allowed the churches like to be more inspired, to be more bold. So even his imprisonment has a positive consequence because like in his suffering, the church is more strong and inspired of how they handle it, because they're like, maybe in their hearts are like, look, if Paul can remain joyful and content while he's in prison, we have no excuse and we have no choice but to have that hope as well, because we're not in prison. So that's the cool thing about like, even suffering. They're like righteous suffering is that like there's a point behind it that
Right.
beyond you. The way to make it bearable and the way to really see the good in it is to see past you. And because if you don't see past yourself, Paul can be like, my situation sucks, but it didn't suck anymore because he saw past himself.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah. Well, the more difficult question even to ask is this: why is it that God allowed 11 of his disciples to be all martyred, with the exception of John?
With the exception of what? John?
John. All of them died, were either killed, martyred, shot into two. They were all martyred for Christ's sake. They were persecuted to death. Why did God allow that?
But isn't why? Well, because isn't John like the writer?
Yeah, the writer of the Revelation. He was the only one technically that was exiled, but not martyred, as in like died. Like Peter was said to be crucified upside down.
Mhm.
Thomas was, I think, dragged by a chariot. So every single disciple died by martyrdom. Well, I think the answer is that, but very strange. They died, but Christianity progressed because of that.
Yeah, because it showed that they were so that
Yeah,
Jesus
it
that they were ready to
inspired.
die for this guy that they were
Yeah,
hanging out with. So it's
correct.
got to be real.
Correct. It inspired more people. So that's the reason why God has a purpose for, well, why would God allow, this is even a more serious thing. Why would God allow a righteous person to suffer?
Like Job.
Yeah, like Job. Again, for a higher purpose. He would like to prove something, but God will not leave this suffering person really suffer all throughout, because Job, he restored the fortunes of Job twice, had another bunch of children.
Right.
So God has a way, has a purpose. Now, by the way, for those Christians who suffered, they will all agree with me that their suffering made them stronger in the faith. made their faith stronger, and they became a better person. They became closer to God. They became more prepared even to meet the Lord one day. So if there is something that suffering has done, it has made a Christian a better Christian.
Right, right. No, that's good
Yeah.
because a lot of people don't realize, they just see, like Josh said, kind of just see yourself, or you just see now. So a lot of Christians, when they suffer, when they're going through it, it's like the worst thing they've ever handled. But then when they go past it and they
Yeah.
suffer, they go through something harder, they'll be like, oh, well, I could do this because what I just had gone through was, worse.
Yeah.
So things
Right.
like that. I feel like for you, like you suffered. I mean, you were like in prison in Saudi Arabia. So probably when you like got ran over by a truck, you're like, oh, well, that was, the truck kind of
Yeah.
sucked, but Saudi
Yeah.
Arabia was kind of really sketchy. So I think I got this.
Yeah. Correct. Correct. Or when all of a sudden you are in the forest and you're beaten by a lot of bees all over, except that's nothing to being run over by a truck.
I think the play there too is that, like, the times that you do get, so let me just show you this, right? Maybe the times that God does try to, like, or bad things happen to Dad, I think it's just for him to lose weight, because that's his sin. You know what I mean? See that?
Like
So he's actually doing
Yeah.
it for your
prison,
benefit,
getting run over, COVID,
Yeah.
like
because he
Yeah.
keeps losing
Well,
like the pounds. He doesn't want to lose himself.
I'll tell you this. God, now I know God allowed COVID so that I will have to exercise. I will have to put my sugar down. I will have to be very conscious of my health, because if not for that, I might die of heart attack or probably stroke.
right. So God was like, well, you don't want to listen and do it, so we're just gonna make you suffer the worst.
So suffer,
So I'm gonna
suffer
get
a
you
little
out
bit.
of it.
Yeah,
Right,
suffer a little bit so you learn, and then now so you can live longer.
right.
Live
And
longer.
this thing probably wouldn't have happened as well, because now maybe you're seeing the brevity of life, Dad. That's why you wanted this whole "what's the point" to happen. Really weird, right?
Yeah, because
So
we started.
Yeah.
We
started
started.
there.
What's
What's
the
the point
point after
after?
COVID?
Yeah.
because you saw the brevity of life, and you saw that, like, it's time to put things, in, like, I guess just to I guess what is it? It's just to put things into perspective and, like, enjoy each moment, enjoy each week. So
Yeah, and then we have
Or do the more important things, because
Mhm.
time could be short.
right, makes sense.
right. So no, and see clearly God, and God was like, well, we're gonna get him COVID so he can lose weight and exercise, and that they can start this podcast. Like it's a little
And they
hard
can
to
start.
get to.
They can start
God, you could have just
reflections
told us to start a podcast. Why did they have to get COVID?
Yeah.
Right.
and
I think
start
because
money day, and then
right. I think because, to be honest, like, maybe if God didn't give him COVID, he'd be like, well, I'm too busy at the moment, because we're creatures of habit.
Right.
And for God you have to break some of the habits that we have for it to really make sense. And so,
No, yeah, I agree.
God will always confront us with something to change directions.
mm,
Right.
Especially when he sees you moving to the wrong direction.
mm,
He will have to say, stop, turn right. And sometimes the turning right is a suffering,
mm.
because we sometimes are not listening. So we
Are
need
you
to be
saying that
stopped.
you're that stubborn, like God has to almost try to
No,
break
not, maybe not stubborn. Maybe not that sensitive anymore.
you? Mm,
So sometimes you need to be slapped. You need to be,
To be slapped.
hit
Yeah.
hard.
Wow.
Yeah, you need to be shouted upon. And so it's always say, well, if you're really very sensitive to the Lord and you follow Him all the time, you are very close to Him, I think you have lesser suffering. I
mm.
would think that. So probably both of you are closer to God, because you're not suffering.
Ah.
Well, I
Or
think
we're so far away. Or we're so far away that we're not a threat anymore.
we're not a threat anymore. The devil's not messing with us anymore
Well,
because
that's the other side.
Right.
If the devil really attacks, well, it's simple warfare. strategy. Who will shoot first, the general or the private?
Yeah,
Right.
you'd shoot the general
Yeah.
first.
Yeah. So they will all scramble because they don't have a leader anymore. You'll shoot the
Mhm.
lieutenant, the captain, the leader of the platoon before you shoot the last man there, because then so it's again, it's also, well, it's what God allows it, but God will rescue you. God is sovereign. Very hard to explain, but that was what I was saying about the theodicy and the
Yeah, I
study
looked
of
that
yeah
term up.
yeah
So basically it's like God allowing certain things to happen for,
for a purpose.
for a
For a
purpose.
purpose. Yeah.
Which kind of goes on to my last question. How does God use pain to fulfill his promise? Maybe you have some, we kind of talked about you, but maybe we have some other examples from the Bible or personal experiences.
Well, I think what God was saying, that all things work together for good in Romans, I think 8:28. All things work together for good. Uh, really, is an act of sovereignty. So when you look at it individually, they are not good. But put it together, it will all work for good for those who love God and is called by God. And Josh was right. You can only see that it was good after it has happened. Uh, Now I would never blame God for my imprisonment in Saudi Arabia. It has made me a better person. It has blessed a lot of lives. It was hard that I had the pain of having an accident, but it has helped a lot. It has blessed some people. It has glorified God in many ways. In fact, it has opened the X1R business. After
Wow.
that, did you know that my head doctor was somehow instrumental in bringing the Hyundai business to X1R, because he was close to the president of Hyundai, something like that. And then uh, even my COVID, I never blame God for it, because the benefits for the kingdom after that was more than what I suffered. So come to think of it, okay, I suffered personally, yes, but the many people that were blessed after that was worth the suffering. So when you balance it from God's perspective, this little suffering of this man has greater benefits for the kingdom.
Mm.
This obviously cannot be understood by someone who is not in the faith.
Wow. Wow. That's so deep.
And I want to encourage somebody to, like, thinking about it now, like, okay, I think so for atheists, like, they have a point where it's like, dude, it's disrespectful because, like, why do we suffer but God never suffers, right? It's not fair that, like, we experience suffering but he doesn't. But that's the main point that I want people to understand, was like, God didn't and has no right to suffer because he's perfect, yet he suffered most of all.
Because he
Because
sent
he came
Jesus.
down. He came
Yeah.
down. He's literally,
Yeah.
Jesus is not, he's God himself in the flesh. To suffer the entirety of man's sin. People are thinking, like when you think about, like, it's simple. When you think about death, okay, like, in my opinion, the cross hurts, obviously, because he was hit, nailed, like a brutal death. But think about carrying the weight of everybody's sin that's ever lived, past, present, future. The spiritual and emotional toil of that, I think, far outweighs the physical torment of what he was feeling, because he literally became sin. And this is God himself, not just like
Right.
an angel, but this is God himself that has to feel this insane pain that most people cannot, or nobody else ever has to experience.
Right. And
even though he didn't deserve it, that's God himself. So in that sense, God did have to suffer, even though he was the least deserving to suffer.
And even we've talked about it in a previous podcast too, I think, is that God literally suffered like a human. So like he was even, I know I'm reading like the gospels right now, but like it was when he said, he pleaded, like, do I really have to do this? But then he's like, but not my will, but your will. So it's like he still has the same feelings that we get. Like, God, do I really have to go through this? Do I really have to do it? So it's not like God doesn't understand, because Jesus was there. So he understood the temptations we have and all that. So no, I think that's super powerful, that the sacrifice of one man or the suffering of one man lives on through generations,
Correct.
because so I
Uh,
think
uh,
it's
and God has to be man. Well, Jesus was God incarnate, meaning God has to be in human form. Otherwise, if he were God, he will not suffer pain.
mm,
And that's the reason why he has to come in human form to pay for our sins, to be seen himself, to literally, I mean, the thought of, uh, as Josh was saying, putting upon himself all the sinfulness of the world in one time, that could be the heaviest feeling of
wow.
sin. He took that on.
Because for us, like when we think about like our sins, think about the sins that we have, and whoever's watching, think about the sins that you have, right? Think about carrying that sin plus what, probably 10 billion, because you have to carry like the sins of everybody that's ever lived.
That's ever live and will live.
So then think about that, like think about that immense weight. Like how do you even like live with that? And that's why now I'm starting to think about like why, the feeling of like, why he was trying to, sweat blood a little bit and this and that, because the weight is immense of him having to be sin.
Mm-hmm.
Him taking on all
Correct.
sin.
Just imagine this, Josh, even just for one sin. Example, hypothetically, Josh, example, you rape someone, and therefore,
Right.
instead of you being in jail for, say, 20 years, in court, I somehow managed to convince the judge it was me who raped the lady. So I was the one sentenced for
Wow.
20 years. And you knew it wasn't me, it was you. So I took your place. I took the crime, and it was on me. So I was in jail for 25 years. Can you imagine the thought that instead of you being in jail for 25 years, it was me who carried that? That was
Wow.
just one. It was just you. Multiply that by the number of people. But just imagine the
people.
kind of of hardship I would carry for so many others.
Right.
And
for
that's the
everybody
crazy
else.
thing is that, look, how insane would that be if, like, me knowing that you're the one that took my sin, and yet I
Yeah.
can't even thank you. I can't
Yeah.
even visit you.
You can't even
Yeah.
visit.
That's
You can't even
disrespectful, right?
acknowledge
Yeah.
that.
Think about that. Like,
Yeah.
that's a great metaphor and example, because a lot of times that's Jesus literally taking on the punishment for us, yet we can't even visit him in this pseudo jail. We can't even visit him because this life is jail compared to
Yeah.
heaven, right?
Mhm.
So we can't
Yeah.
even visit him in this life. We don't even talk
Yeah.
to him, even though he was the one that sacrificed himself for us. That's
Yeah.
insane.
That's a really
Yeah.
good analogy, because some people can't imagine, like when you just think about, oh, Jesus took my place, and like it's on the cross and it's old, and they can't imagine it. But when you put it
Yeah.
in something so real, like everybody knows what jail is, everybody knows what rape is, you know what I'm saying? So like they can literally understand how it can hit them more. What's the point? If you guys want to do a quick wrap up of the topic that we had.
Yeah. To me, the point really is that suffering generally is a consequence of man's sin. And when God allows suffering, especially for his children, for the righteous, it is for a greater purpose. I think that's my point.
I think for me, the point is simply like, it's encouraging to know that like we suffer in this life, no matter who you are, Christian or not Christian, we suffer.
Mhm.
So might as well, be a Christian. You suffer no matter what, right? Like that's, but the way I think about it is that it's so encouraging that the master suffered more than I ever could.
Wow.
And that's somebody who's blameless. So how can the servant be better than the master? So no matter what, it's grace still, because the suffering that I endure is still going to be less than what the master endured. It's insane.
Right.
It's insane to think about. And so it's no matter what, it's about grace.
Yeah.
Because then, like, not only is he relatable, but he will always suffer more than I ever could, even though he doesn't deserve 1 second of it.
And probably if he did not suffer on the cross, we would even have suffered far more.
Yeah.
And we would have no hope. And think about the selflessness that God had to do to put himself as sin for us on the cross. That's insane, because Like, it was our mistakes. It was us that messed it up. But yet he's there. And he has that humility, like, and that selflessness for
Right.
that to be the way out. So
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think you guys had some great points today. So I think I can go ahead and close this in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this time for us to discuss this topic. Thank you for teaching us today through the questions we had and just learning more about why suffering has to happen. I pray, Lord, that we continue to seek you and acknowledge and receive your grace, because the sufferings we have gone through are always for a bigger purpose, for your purpose. So thank you for allowing us to discuss this today. Thank you for allowing us to be here and for just giving us life. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
amen.